It feels like this might be the longest stretch that we've gone in hip-hop without a classic rap album. And with the new year on the horizon, I feel like a lot of us are wondering who will be the artist to drop that next classic. So let me know down in the comments, guys, who do you think will be that rapper to give us that next classic rap album? And last time on the Kanye West bracket, we asked for you guys to give us 5,000 likes, and we actually reached that in less than 24 hours. So let's try to get to 7,000 for this one. We really appreciate it. But Ant, let me ask you, what do you think was the last time that we actually got a classic rap album?
Last July, 2023, Utopia.
You think that's gonna?
Of course, why not? It literally it checks off every single box.
It's way too soon,
but
man.
What are you
can't call you can't call an album a classic.
I'm not calling it right now. I'm not calling it right now, right? Because you have like your strict little 5-year rule.
No, but I don't.
You're
think...
a stickler, and you come up with your suspenders and
guys,
your glasses.
I
it's
don't
not 5 years,
guys.
I don't care about that.
We in this culture throw around classic too loose. Oh, did you hear the new Cardi song? That shit's a classic. Oh, hold on. Kanye West sampled Backstreet Boys and everybody. That's a fucking classic.
I could put my entire mortgage on the fact that Utopia will be considered a classic in 5 years from now.
Will be considered a classic. So yes, it's one thing to say it has the makings of a classic album, but to jump ahead and say, oh, it dropped last July, like chill, bro.
But you don't. Okay, so you don't think that Utopia will be considered a classic album?
The whole thing about a classic. Look, I'll take the comparison of a car. Right, you go back to.
Brother, I don't need the
you
car
go back
comparison.
to the 1965 Ford. I'm answering you with this analogy. You go to the 1965 Ford Mustang. That is a classic because it's become a classic over time. That was one of the first ever pony cars, affordable sports car. It was featured in James Bond movies,
Brother,
and over
I'm not
time,
asking you about a Mustang. I'm asking yes or no.
It became iconic. It's too early to say because if you know what a classic truly means,
yes or no.
Let me answer your question. Or you want to keep asking me over again?
But I'm just
saying. You want the answer, or you want to keep asking?
But I know where you're going with this. You're not even going to answer my question. You're going to make a Mustangs and ponies. I'm not asking you that. I'm looking at Utopia, and we're asking the question. If you look at your
it's not a classic album because a classic
needs age.
Time. Time is the most important factor for a classic. Just so we're on the same page, because if we're not,
absolutely.
we can stop the conversation.
But that's what I think is going to be considered the next classic album within hip hop.
That's not what I asked you. I asked you, what's the last classic that dropped?
Well, I think based on our last episode that we had done, I had said Daytona, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I believe my answer was Daytona.
Daytona is a good answer. I think Astroworld is probably the last classic in my eyes because that came out a bit after Daytona.
Yeah, you could say Astroworld. I think around that 2018 time, it's appropriate to start saying these things. How about Igor? You look at 2019 now, especially that now we're in 2024 and you're, let's say past the 5-year rule. Well, almost at this point. Would you consider it a classic in your eyes at this point?
I think that it still needs maybe a bit more time, but I think that it does have the makings of a classic. Same thing for Whole Lotta Red. It's only 3 years old at this point, but I feel like just looking at the impact it had on the culture, what it did for festival culture, how it affected rage rap in the current scene and landscape of hip-hop right now. Again, it has the makings of it, but we have to see because maybe in 2026 I'll wake up and be like, you know what? We can all agree this album sounds like milk now. You know what I mean? You never know. That's the whole purpose
Yeah, but you look at an Astroworld and you look at an Igor and you kind of know where you're at with your listening experience with it, and you understand your relationship with the album.
It's been multiple years.
Well, not only that, but I think that yes, of course, the album quality has to play into this, and this is going to go into my next point of what I considered a classic album and why I brought Utopia into this conversation. Mm-hmm. Not only do you have to have the quality of the album be up to par, you have to have anthems attached to that album. Let's say super strongs that carried the entire narrative of the album.
Yeah.
Songs that people were just absolutely junking throughout the year. Whatever the case may be. Right? And then you also have to look at, let's say, the influence and what it did culturally. You look at 2023, that was stamped by Utopia. And that's what I kind of look at. So my whole point with Utopia wasn't that I'm saying it's a certified classic right now, right? Because like you had said, it needs time to be able to age. But I think we could put a blindfold over my eyes right now and say in a couple of years, the community will consider that a classic in the hip hop genre.
I think that just because an album carries a year, like Utopia did for the mainstream scene, doesn't exactly equate a classic album. I mean, I think that there's a couple of things that go into it. A masterpiece. Is Utopia a masterpiece? Not quite, in my opinion. Will it have a massive influence and effect on the sound of music going forward? It's yet to be seen just because he already mastered and introduced that psychedelic trap sound dating back to Rodeo, in my opinion. That's probably the safest album to call a classic from his catalog. But again, time will tell. We'll see how it ages. But for me, when I look at a classic album, I like to take it back to something like The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, where you look back on it now and 25 years later, everybody's still sampling that album, from Kanye West to Cardi B to Drake to all the biggest artists in the world.
That's undeniable.
And the way that it pushed boundaries for artists to prioritize melody, like that album is in a class of its own. That's an easy album to name a classic. So for me, the newer an album is, the harder it is to really distinguish and be like, this is a classic, this isn't. Like, it's anytime.
But I mean, no, I think you could tell with Utopia. At this point, there's a huge cultural moment as well. But you were saying, like, let's take your argument now with, like, the spinning the wheel thing, right? Like, the influence sort of factor, you know? What did it do to change the sound?
Yeah.
Could we both agree Daytona is a classic album?
Yeah.
So what did that do directly to influence the sound of hip-hop?
I think it definitely brought more attention towards underground hip-hop and coke rap as a whole. I think that
around the past
it's been popular for a long time, but around that 2018 point is around that same time that you started seeing way more interest in Griselda as a movement as well. I think that contributed.
Well, you could
Apart from that, there's also classic moments like it being tied into the whole Drake feud with Infrared.
No,
that made it a massive moment too.
But
and
what
got
I'm
more
asking
people
you is
listening.
about the sound, because when you were talking about the Utopia argument, you were saying that, oh, well, you had mastered that sound already. I could say the same thing for Pusha T. Like, yes, I do think it's a flawless album. It's one of my favorite albums of the 2010s decade. There's absolutely no doubt, but you know, there was Bandana that came out, you know, that year after, which you could say, okay, maybe that was directly influenced. But even at that, like, you look at Piñata in 2014, kind of the same thing was going on that album sonically and also rapping wise. So, well, I do agree, like, yes, you have to see, like, the influence of an album and, like, the artistry and how it transcends the generations.
Yeah.
Looking at, like, let's say, a Man of the Moon, for example, right? Like, you could hear that album everywhere in certain new modern hip hop.
Yep.
Daytona, I feel like, is kind of like the Joker in that sort of, like, situation where, yes, it's considered a classic, but, like, everyone's doing fucking coke rap, you know? It's been a thing for the past 30 years of hip-hop, you know? So, with that being said, that's why I think Utopia is going to kind of be that same Joker where, like, it's the same cultural massive moment. It has the album quality, and it was also tied into a huge narrative for Travis Scott's career, who's one of the biggest rappers to ever grace this genre. So that was my argument with Utopia.
But we've had way more time with Daytona than we've had with Utopia. And I think although influencing the sonic landscape is a huge aspect of it, if it doesn't have it or relax it a little bit, I don't think it's a set-all or be-all for a classic album. I really think it's the way that the album is perceived and ages over time.
Okay, but let's get into
talk about who we think is capable of it. Before we answer the question of who we think will be that person to drop that classic album, who is capable of it in 2024 and beyond that? Because, I mean, as much as I want to be optimistic, and I'm sure you do too, there's no telling if we're actually going to be getting a classic album in 2024, despite all of these major fucking releases being slated for this year, right?
Could we remove the obvious name off the list with J. Cole? You think that's a good thing to do?
That might be my answer, so I'll get to that a bit later. But who do you think, besides someone like a J. Cole, again, in 2024? Kanye West. I want to talk about him just because when you look at someone that's dropped the most classics, his name always comes up. But the thing about a classic, too, and tell me if you agree, is that there needs to be a consensus around it, right? There needs to be like a general view of like the majority of hip hop listeners deem this album to be fucking great and to be stellar, right?
Yeah.
And my opinion is that Kanye's projects and his music has always been a bit polarizing and divisive over time, but now he's become almost divisive and polarizing as an individual and as an artist.
But he's always been doing that.
Yes, but
it's always been a big part
maybe
of
it's to a point of no return where like I've seen a lot of fans from Kanye West that are like, you know what, because of the way that he's behaving, let's say, I'm not even gonna like be checking for
I don't even
want
to talk about that. It has nothing to do with the music. I want to talk about
it
myself.
Doesn't, but
no, I want to talk about myself and what I think about the album. I think that yes, obviously it's a possibility that Kanye West does drop a classic. I mean, you could always do it. I mean, he's one of the greatest artists to live in our generation. And again, you know, if you guys watch the podcast, you know how we do it here. You know, just separating the art from the artist. I mean, if this guy drops a masterpiece and then after that, it's a consensus around the community that this is like the album. This is really the album, and this is what's going to be able to carry it. Then I mean, at that point, then you know what's going to be the narrative around it.
We'll always have that view for sure. I just think that some people are concerned that it bleeds into the music, like whatever else is going on outside of the music. If that bleeds in, then maybe I could see why they would want to conflate the two. But nonetheless, yes, Kanye West is always the guy to never count out because he's done it time and time again. I just don't think that he's in the best form to do it. So if you think about it, when was the last time he dropped a classic? The Life of Pablo?
Probably.
Donda maybe could be considered just because of the experience and the presentation he offered.
Nah, but it's too bloated. It's way
Yeah,
too bloated.
it's way too bloated,
And it
yeah.
hasn't aged, well, not that it hasn't aged the best. I still think it was a fantastic listen.
But yeah, in terms of who
regardless,
could
though.
do this, I don't think we could just name like our favorite rappers. I think that we have to look at these master curators that are known for being able to master the dynamics of production sequencing, that are able to again offer an experience unlike no other. For example, looking at what Dr. Dre did with 2001, being able to round up this Avengers cast of rappers and have them on this sort of newly constructed platform for West Coast and the West Coast sound. So again, I feel like you need to have certain criterias down packed. So I think Dr. Dre is someone that if he comes back out after all this time, I don't think he's coming back out just to say what's up. I think it's because he has something serious.
I'm a massive Dr. Dre fan. It's 2001 is
You're
my
counting him out?
I'm not counting him out. You know, the guy's pushing 60.
So?
When was the last time?
When has age ever been an issue?
Okay,
Look at what Black Thought did at 50 years old with cheat codes.
Yeah, but cheat codes is not considered a classic. Let's call a spade here. What I'm trying to tell you is that regardless of the form of a rapper, there has to be some sort of like. There has to be a guideline. You know, I don't want to say that Dr. Dre can't drop a fantastic album. He's one of my favorite artists of all time. I'm just saying that, like, you saying that Dr. Dre is going to drop a classic album in 2020 is a bit deftone. I'm just telling you. I think it's a bit deftone.
That's deftone. I definitely don't think so, because when you're looking at someone that brings overwhelming originality and connective tissue to albums, Dr. Dre is one of the only ones I think that is still capable of offering that kind of creativity on the highest level. And I mean, we haven't even, it's not like we were to say, oh, he's put out projects that have been stinkers. No, like the guy hasn't dropped since Compton. You know what I mean? It's been years,
but
almost a decade.
Would you consider that a classic?
No, but that's one album.
Yeah, but that's what I'm trying to tell you, though, is that
and it was a
even
soundtrack album.
Okay, well, exactly. The guy has such a limited catalog, and you saying that you think he's going to drop a classic in this decade, in my opinion, doesn't really make too much sense to me. But I'm going to get to the J. Cole conversation, because that's like my clear.
Is that your clear-cut one?
Of course. That's why I just wanted to skip to the chase at the beginning of this, just because I think that it's the obvious one, and I think it's going to happen. And I said this also in a lot of different recordings that I did about this new Fall Off album and how I feel like it's going to connect to the listeners, and just the stage at which J. Cole is at in his career. I think it's so interesting because not that he has a lot to prove, just that all the eyes are on him. You get what I'm trying to say? Like, especially within the big three. I mean, you got your Kendrick album, you got the Drake run this decade. And I mean, after the offseason, I feel like there was a lot more hunger and there was a lot more attention and a lot more of, let's say, a want for a new J. Cole album. Not only that, but the album's been teased for 5 years at this point, so the anticipation's at an all-time high. The fall off, just the sentence itself holds such a mystique to it at this point.
Tells a story.
Exactly. So that's what I'm trying to say, is that you already know what's going to happen with the culture once that ends up dropping. You look at the album experience after, and J. Cole's at the top of his game right now. So that's what I'm saying, is like, this could be a clear, like, cultural moment this year for hip-hop, and that's where I want to leave it. You know, you look at a lot of guys right now at the top of the mainstream, right? Like we were talking about with Kanye, not necessarily in the best form right now. You look at an Eminem, for example. I mean, the guy's been rapping for 4+ decades. I don't expect a classic out of him in 2024. You look at someone like Kendrick Lamar, for example, just dropped Mr. Morale.
That's what I was going to say. Can we count him out? Like, are we fucking idiots to
not.
say Kendrick might drop the next classic album, but we don't even know if he's dropping this decade
but
again,
you
right?
don't even know what's going on.
That's
with Kendrick.
my point. But
if you
wait, let's just say he was to drop in the next 2 years. Do you think it would be him?
Yeah, of course. But I mean, if you're getting J. Cole this year, no, the next one is J. Cole.
But let me ask you this, okay? Because yes, my clear-cut answer is also J. Cole with the fall off, and I'm gonna circle back to it. But just to say, I feel like when it comes to newcomers, when it comes to young acts, I don't think that I'm counting them in the picture, to be fair.
Why?
I think that the next classic album will come from an established act who maybe is going to want to show the world they haven't lost their mojo, and that wants to show people that they're just as good as they were when they solidified their positions in hip-hop. And that's why it would fall to a J. Cole. That's why it would fall to a Kendrick Lamar, and also a Tyler, the Creator. And we'll get to Tyler in a little bit, but going back to J. Cole, like you said, I think he does have quite a bit to prove, not to us, but to himself. I think that, like he mentioned in his remix to Pipe Down, people are handing him the bronze. I think he has a lot to prove to himself in the sense that I am the GOAT. I am the numero uno. Also, I think that when when it comes to this album, like you were saying, he's in peak form. But let me ask you this. The Offseason was a fantastic album. What does he have to do with the fall off to really make it a classic?
I don't even know. I'm gonna be
not even. What about
I don't know.
experience-wise? Like, is it the track sequencing? Does he need to have a grandiose rollout? Like,
Yeah, but
what as a fan do you want to see that could give it that aura?
it's already there.
It's already there for you. Wow.
It's
So right now, as long as the music delivers on all fronts, it's there.
Well, no, it has to. It obviously has to hit culturally. Like, you have to see it once it drops. But like, I'm not a fortune teller. You know, like, what am I? I'm rubbing my crystal ball here, and I'm looking at when J. Cole
You're so
drops.
passive aggressive today. All I'm saying.
I'm not passive, but you have to be realistic about these conversations.
Hypothetically, I mean, like, for example, Tyler, the Creator, right? There's always a slick visual style associated to all of his albums. There's characters that you can engulf yourself in story-wise.
But the element of surprise is such a big part of the classic album conversation. For example, like, I could say, I want J. Cole to deliver me like 15 of these no role model tracks, and give me this and that. I can't do it because
But you could say, I want a couple anthems on the album.
But, okay, if there's not a single album, if there's not a single anthem on the album, but the album is absolutely flawless, is that going to stop me from saying, well, listen, this is ridiculous?
It might not stop you from saying it's ridiculous, but it might stop you from saying it's a classic, because I think we could both agree that an album, like, for example, The Forever Story, a lot of people find that to be a masterpiece, but it didn't hit the masses or hit us culturally enough, I feel like, to be considered a classic down the line. Daytona, yes, because it was a mainstream moment because of what it was attached to.
But the PR was a mainstream moment, not the actual songs itself. You go on Spotify, those songs aren't streaming the way that we think they are, but it's still a classic. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Slow the roll a bit. Just wait, because I feel like you're expecting too much. You're expecting the no role models, the middle child.
I never said that. I never said I don't want anything like a no role models on this album.
You get what I'm. It's a figure of speech. Obviously, okay. Listen, you get a diamond record out of the album. Fuck it. I mean, everyone's happy, and I feel like J. Cole and the rest of Dreamville.
Yeah.
And everyone else is happy. But for the sake of the conversation, I feel like it really just comes down to the element of surprise for me. Like, what could stimulate me, like, when I'm going into this rollout? You know, like, the thing is that, I don't know, for example, with the offseason, something that was super cool was the mini documentary that was attached. The whole basketball PR run with it, the Slam magazine. Like, there was certain pieces of journalism and PR that were attached to that album that made it feel fucking crazy. You know, and if you would have asked me a year or two ago, what is J. Cole going to be able to do with the offseason that's going to make it feel like the way it did, I wouldn't have been able to tell you. The only way I was going to be able to know is when I went through that rollout and when I got the music. So that's kind of where I'm at with it, is that as long as the album is up to J. Cole standards and it is what it is, like, you know, for what he's hyping it up to be, dude, listen, you have an album of the year on your hands. Not only that, but, like, it's the fall off. Like, it's kind of like the utopia. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, that's the Mecca. That's the Mecca.
Yeah.
That could be the Mecca of his entire career.
That's what I think. He's been building up to this. It's the album he's been, sort of hyping up for the longest time throughout his career, that I think it needs to be better than the J. Cole standards, just because not every single J. Cole album is a classic. So for me, it needs to sort of go a bit beyond that. And I think that based on his recent track record, in terms of the features, in terms of the offseason, what he did on the Dreamville album, yes, I think that he is in the best shape of his career, lyrically, sonically, and just being in touch with the rhythm. So, yes, I think that we are in line for that. But let me ask you this. Could it be Tyler instead?
Well, yeah. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about Jid? Do you want to throw Jid in the conversation? He's someone else I think that we could throw into the conversation.
I feel like the Forever Story is going to age in the community as a classic. In the community.
Okay.
And maybe our community or the NFR community.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, like, yes, you can even say that surround sound right now is going absolutely ridiculous. So the thing is that I understand, like, you know, you can't put it up next to a Graduation. You can't put it up, let's say, next to the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill or Ready to Die. Obviously not. But I mean, you know,
it wouldn't even be fair to do that because it's been out for a year.
Yeah, absolutely. You just got to see how these things age, and then, you know, whatever. It doesn't age that way. But there's certain albums that I feel like you could know, like, right away. So I feel like, yes, but Tyler, we're still debating about Igor, and it's like 4 or 5 years later. You know, let's wait a bit on that.
Yeah.
Let's see because J. Cole is slated to drop in 2024, apparently. You know, it's still just rumors. Maybe he drops in 2025. Maybe you get it in 2026. Who the fuck knows at this point? But I think just for the sake of the conversation, saying J. Cole is probably the most educated answer that you can have. Let me ask you another question, all right? Because there was something that you said earlier in this podcast that kind of not raised my attention, but I'm like, I get where you're coming from, but I feel like give them a chance, And you said
Okay.
that none of the new roster is going to deliver you a new classic. So
yeah.
that's the thing that I want to ask you, is that I understand where you're coming from, because maybe the music quality isn't up to par these days, or maybe, let's say, we're not accustomed to the feeling of their studio album experiences. Baby Keem fucks around and he drops an album, and he drops an album of the year contender.
Was the Melodic Blue a classic album to you?
I
you think it might age as such?
I don't know.
I don't think that there's enough.
I don't
think there's enough quality tracks as a whole on that album for it to even be in contention.
You just don't know,
yes,
though.
it's not impossible. But if you had to ask me again, and for me to give you my prediction, I would predict that one of these established legends in the game, or soon to be legends, are more likely, as of right now, as of today. Again, who knows? Fucking Destroy Lonely might have the whole world on lock by April of 2024 and ends up surprising everybody. I think that's possible. I just think the most likely scenario for where we're at right now and what we've been able to hear and experience from hip-hop as of late, my answer would go more towards a J. Cole, a Kendrick Lamar, a Tyler, the Creator, a J.I.D, or maybe one of the Metro Boomin albums. That's where I would
Metro's a good contender.
Yeah.
You see Heroes and Villains aging as a classic?
It could, bro. Again, I think experience-wise, again, that was Trap's Avengers album/movie in the sense that he made it feel like literally a Marvel movie, and you got banger after banger. So maybe to this generation it will be a classic. Too soon to say, but I think the next album with Future, maybe it'll have a DS2 effect. Who knows? We'll have to end up seeing.
Throwing around these words loosely, as you tell me, Lou.
Yeah.
You were blaming me at the beginning of this episode. Now Lou's saying that Future's dropping a DS2 in 2024.
We don't know.
So, let us know in the comment section, guys. Who do you think is dropping the next classic album in hip hop music? And let me know. Do you think it's going to be coming from the newer generation or from the cast of rappers that Lou just named? Guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Turn on the notification bell if you haven't had it on already. Excuse me, a bit of a mumble there, but thank you so much for watching this, and we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.